December 7th, 1941, 6:15 a.m., Hawaiian Standard Time, the Pacific. Dawn breaks crimson over Pearl Harbor, its waters mirror still beneath a canopy of cumulus clouds that drift like cotton islands across an azure expanse. The air carries the salt tang of ocean spray, mingled with the sweet perfume of plumeria blossoms from the nearby hills. In this moment of crystalline tranquility, 183 Japanese aircraft slice through the morning sky in perfect formation, their engines humming a deadly synchrony that will shatter America's peaceful slumber forever. Commander Mitsuo Fukita adjusts his leather flight goggles and peers through the cockpit glass of his Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber. Below him, the geometric patterns of Pearl Harbor's naval base spread like a meticulously arranged chessboard battleships moored in neat rows along Ford Island, their gray hulls gleaming in the early light like sleeping giants. The Hawaiian breeze carries the distant sound of church bells from Honolulu, calling the faithful to Sunday morning worship. Fuchita's gloved hand hovers over his radio transmitter, ready to broadcast the code words that will launch the most audacious naval assault in military history. Tora. Tora, Tora. Yet in this moment of supreme confidence, as Japanese pilots prepare to deliver what they believe will be a decisive blow to American naval power, none can foresee the technological revolution that awaits them. Hidden among the verdant hills of Oahu, a new kind of warfare stirs to life invisible, electronic, and utterly transformative. The age of radar has arrived, and with it, the beginning of the end for Imperial Japan's dreams of Pacific dominance. The attack on Pearl Harbor has been etched into American consciousness as a day of infamy, a moment when surprise and treachery nearly crippled the Pacific Fleet. Yet beneath this narrative of initial defeat lies a deeper story, one of technological awakening, of a sleeping giant not merely stirred to anger, but transformed by the very nature of modern warfare itself. For while Japanese bombs fell like deadly rain upon the harbor that December morning, American radar operators were learning lessons that would reshape the entire trajectory of the Pacific War. The roots of this transformation stretch back to the late 1930s, when American scientists and military strategists began to grasp the revolutionary potential of radio detection and ranging technology. Dr. Robert Watson Watt's pioneering work in Britain had demonstrated radar's capacity to peer through darkness and weather, to see the invisible approach of enemy aircraft long before they appeared on the horizon. By 1940, the United States had begun deploying its own radar installations across strategic locations, including the remote outposts of the Hawaiian Islands. Opana Point, perched on Oahu's northern shore like a sentinel overlooking the vast Pacific, housed one of these experimental radar stations. Its rotating antenna, a skeletal framework of metal and wire, swept the skies in mechanical rhythm, sending invisible pulses into the ether and listening for their return. The technology was primitive by later standards. Bulky vacuum tubes glowed orange in darkened control rooms, while operators squinted at oscilloscope screens that painted ghostly green traces of distant aircraft. Yet for all its crude mechanics, this electronic eye possessed a power that would prove more devastating to enemy forces than any conventional weapon. On the morning of December 7th, Private Joseph Lockard and Private George Elliott manned the Opana Point station during what should have been a routine training exercise. At 7:02 a.m., their screen erupted with the largest radar contact man had ever witnessed, a massive formation of aircraft approaching from the north, still 132 miles distant but closing rapidly. The blip on their oscilloscope represented more than 50 aircraft, a formation so large it seemed to dwarf anything in the American inventory. Lockard immediately telephoned the information to the Interceptor Command at Fort Shafter, but Duty Officer Lieutenant Kermit Tyler assuming the radar contact represented a scheduled flight of American B-17 bombers expected from California. Dismissed the report with words that would haunt him for decades. Well, don't worry about it. The failure of command structure could not diminish the technological triumph that had just occurred. For the first time in Pacific warfare, an attacking force had been detected and tracked long before visual contact, providing precious minutes of advance warning that, properly utilized, might have changed the course of history. As Fuchita's first wave swept over the Oahu coastline at 7:40 a.m. Japanese pilots expected to encounter a sleepy, unprepared target. Intelligence reports had painted American forces as complacent and technologically inferior, their defenses concentrated on surface vessels rather than aerial threats. The reality that greeted them proved far more complex and unsettling than Imperial Japanese Navy planners had anticipated. Lieutenant Shigeru Utaya, leading a squadron of Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, noticed the strange atmospheric disturbances almost immediately. His radio crackled with interference, unlike anything he had experienced during training flights over the Japanese home islands. Static bursts across communication frequencies and rhythmic pulses, as if some invisible force were sweeping the airwaves with electronic fingers. Other pilots in his formation reported similar phenomena: compass needles that wavered inexplicably, radio communications that faded and returned in mysterious patterns. What these Japanese aviators were experiencing represented their first encounter with active radar jamming, an unintended consequence of the multiple radar installations scattered across Oahu, while American operators had not yet learned to coordinate their systems for maximum effectiveness. The collective electronic emissions from sites at Opana Point, Koiloa, Fort Shafter, and Koko had created an invisible web of radio energy that interfered with enemy navigation and communication systems in ways that neither side fully understood. Commander Fukita himself noted in his post-attack report the unusual behavior of American anti-aircraft fire during the assault's opening minutes, rather than the random, desperate response Imperial planners had predicted. Hawaiian defenders demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate attack vectors and concentrate firepower with remarkable precision. Unknown to Fukita, radar installations were providing gun crews with bearing and distance information, transforming what should have been a chaotic defensive response into a coordinated, electronic ballet of detection and destruction. The second wave of the Japanese attack, launched an hour after the first, encountered even more sophisticated resistance. By 8:40 a.m., American radar operators had overcome their initial shock and begun coordinating information between stations, creating a primitive but effective early warning network. Lieutenant Commander Kikuchi Takahashi, piloting a Aichi D-3A dive bomber toward the naval yards, reported to his squadron mates that American fighters seemed to know exactly where Japanese aircraft would appear, arriving at interception points with impossible accuracy. What Takahashi witnessed was the birth of integrated air defense, the marriage of radar detection, radio communication, and tactical response that would become the hallmark of American technological superiority throughout the Pacific War. While Japanese pilots had trained extensively for combat against visible enemies, they found themselves confronting an invisible adversary that could track their movements, predict their intentions, and coordinate countermeasures with mechanical precision. The psychological impact on Japanese aircrew proved as significant as the tactical implications. Pilot Officer Yoshio Shiga, flying escort for the torpedo bombers attacking Battleship Row, later described the eerie sensation of being watched by ghosts as his formation approached its targets. Radio chatter among his squadron mates revealed growing unease as pilots reported compass malfunctions, navigation difficulties, and the persistent feeling that American defenders possessed supernatural knowledge of Japanese movements. These reports, transmitted back to Admiral Keiichi Nagamo aboard the carrier Akagi, painted a disturbing picture of American technological capabilities that contradicted pre-war intelligence assessments. Japanese naval doctrine had emphasized surprise, speed, and overwhelming force delivered by superior pilots flying superior aircraft. The Pearl Harbor attack was achieving its immediate objectives. American battleships burned and listed in the harbor. Aircraft lay scattered and destroyed across airfields. Yet the very ease of these tactical victories masked a deeper strategic revelation that would reshape the entire conflict. For within the chaos and destruction of that December morning lay the seeds of a technological revolution that would ultimately doom the Japanese Empire. American engineers, observing radar's performance under actual combat conditions, began refining and improving their systems with unprecedented urgency. The crude experimental installations of 1941 would evolve into the sophisticated radar networks that would guide American bombers to Japanese cities, track kamikaze attacks with deadly accuracy, and provide the electronic foundation for America's industrial war machine. The symbolic power of this transformation crystallized around a single, seemingly mundane object that would become emblematic of American technological abundance: the vacuum tube. These glowing glass cylinders, filled with inert gas and threaded with tungsten filaments, formed the electronic heart of every radar installation, every radio set, every piece of communications equipment that would carry America to victory. While Japanese industry struggled to produce sufficient quantities of basic materials, steel for ships, aluminum for aircraft, petroleum for fuel, American factories began mass-producing vacuum tubes by the millions, their warm orange glow becoming the literal illumination of technological supremacy. Each tube represented not merely a component, but a philosophy of warfare that emphasized mechanical precision over human sacrifice, electronic intelligence over Bushido courage, industrial capacity over spiritual determination. Japanese pilots, trained to view death in battle as the ultimate honor, found themselves confronting an enemy that sought to eliminate human error through technological perfection, to replace individual heroism with systematic efficiency. The radar installations of Oahu became laboratories for this new form of warfare, their operators learning to read the electronic signatures of different aircraft types, to distinguish between friendly and enemy formations, to coordinate defensive responses with split-second timing. Private Lockard, whose initial radar contact had been dismissed by his superiors, continued his shifts with newfound purpose, understanding that his oscilloscope screen represented a window into the future military conflict. As weeks turned to months following Pearl Harbor, American radar technology spread across the Pacific like an electronic nervous system, linking island outposts and naval vessels in an invisible network of mutual protection and shared intelligence. Japanese commanders, initially confident that their superior pilot training and aircraft performance would overcome any American technological advantages, found themselves increasingly frustrated by their inability to achieve tactical surprise. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 demonstrated radar's growing influence on naval warfare. For the first time in military history, opposing fleets engaged without coming within visual range of each other, their aircraft guided to targets by electronic eyes that could peer hundreds of miles across empty ocean. Japanese pilots, accustomed to navigation by visual landmarks and celestial positioning, struggled to adapt to a form of warfare where success depended increasingly on electronic sophistication rather than traditional flying skills. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, began to grasp the strategic implications of America's technological evolution. His private correspondence reveals growing concern about Japan's ability to match American radar development. Writing to a colleague in June 1942, "We have awakened a sleeping giant, but the true nature of his strength lies not in his anger, but in his workshops." The prescient observation captured the essence of America's wartime transformation, a shift from peacetime complacency to wartime innovation that would prove unstoppable. The electromagnetic spectrum itself became a battlefield where American engineers wielded advantages that Japanese scientists could not hope to match. Access to rare earth elements necessary for vacuum tube production, unlimited electrical power for radar installations, and most crucially, the industrial capacity to manufacture electronic components in vast quantities, provided the United States with technological resources that Imperial Japan simply could not duplicate. By 1943, American radar installations could track individual aircraft at ranges exceeding 200 miles, coordinate fighter interceptions with mathematical precision, and guide anti-aircraft fire with lethal accuracy. Japanese pilots, many of them veterans of the Pearl Harbor attack, found themselves flying into electronic ambush that seemed to anticipate their every move. The psychological pressure of facing an omniscient enemy began to erode the confidence and esprit de corps that had made Japanese naval aviation the most feared force in the Pacific. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's leading fighter aces, described the experience of confronting American radar-guided defenses as flying through a spider's web made of lightning. His memoir recounts the growing demoralization among Japanese pilots as they realized that individual skill and courage, the foundations of Bushido tradition, had become secondary to technological superiority in determining combat outcomes. The symbolic vacuum tube, glowing steadily in countless radar installations across the Pacific, represented more than mere technological advancement. It embodied the democratic principle that victory should belong to the society capable of the greatest innovation and production, rather than the one willing to accept the greatest sacrifice. Each tube, manufactured in American factories by workers earning decent wages under safe conditions, stood in stark contrast to the desperate industrial conditions in wartime Japan, where slave labor and resource shortages hampered every aspect of military production. As the war progressed, American radar technology evolved with breathtaking speed. Microwave radar, capable of detecting smaller targets with greater precision, began appearing on American ships and aircraft by 1944. Japanese pilots found themselves tracked, not only by ground-based installations, but by airborne radar sets that could peer through darkness and weather with mechanical eyes that never tired, never blinked, never lost concentration. The kamikaze attacks of 1944 and 1945 represented, in many ways, Japan's admission of technological defeat. Unable to match American electronic warfare capabilities, Japanese commanders resorted to suicide tactics that emphasized spiritual determination over mechanical sophistication. Yet even these desperate measures proved inadequate against radar-guided defenses that could track incoming kamikaze aircraft from the moment they appeared on the horizon, coordinate multiple layers of intercepting fire, and direct defensive fighters with pinpoint accuracy. Commander Fakita, the same pilot who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, found himself assigned to defensive duties over the Japanese home islands by 1945, watching helplessly as American B-29 bombers appeared on radar screens like ghostly harbingers of destruction. The electronic eyes that had first detected his approaching formation over Oahu had evolved into a vast network of surveillance and targeting systems that made American strategic bombing possible on an unprecedented scale. The irony was not lost on Japanese Military leaders, the attack that was intended to cripple American naval power had instead catalyzed the technological revolution that would ultimately consume the Japanese empire. Each radar installation destroyed at Pearl Harbor had been replaced by 10 more sophisticated successors. Each lesson learned in the heat of battle had been incorporated into improved systems that pushed the boundaries of electronic warfare ever further. Final months of the Pacific War saw American radar technology reach new levels of sophistication and integration. The atomic bombing missions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were guided by radar systems that could navigate through weather and darkness with unprecedented precision, dropping their terrible payloads with mechanical accuracy that no human bombardier could match. The same electronic principles that had detected Japanese aircraft over Oahu in 1941 had evolved into the guidance systems for humanity's most destructive weapons. In the post-war testimonies of Japanese military leaders, a common theme emerges: the gradual recognition that they had been fighting not merely against American military forces, but against American industrial and technological civilization itself. Each vacuum tube represented the output of factories that operated around the clock, powered by electrical grids of unimaginable complexity, staffed by workers whose productivity was enhanced by mechanical aids and technological tools that Japanese industry could not hope to duplicate. The radar installations of the Pacific War became monuments to a new form of warfare, one where victory belonged not to the bravest or most skillful warriors, but to the society capable of the most sophisticated technological integration. The glowing vacuum tubes that powered these electronic sentinels represented the triumph of systematic innovation over individual heroism, of industrial capacity over spiritual determination, of democratic abundance over totalitarian sacrifice. As the sun set over Pearl Harbor on August 15th, 1945, the same waters that had burned with the destruction of American battleships 4 years earlier reflected the lights of radar installations that had helped guide the Allied victory. The electronic eyes that swept the Pacific skies continued their mechanical vigil, no longer watching for enemy aircraft but scanning for the peaceful flights of a world transformed by technology and tempered by the terrible lessons of global war. The vacuum tubes glowed on, their warm orange light a beacon of human ingenuity and democratic resilience, a testament to the power of free societies to adapt, innovate, and ultimately triumph over the forces of tyranny and aggression. In their steady radiance lay the promise of a future where technology would serve not destruction, but the peaceful aspirations of mankind, where the electronic eyes that had once tracked enemy bombers would guide commercial aircraft safely home, where the radar pulses that had coordinated military defenses would help ships navigate safely through storm and darkness. The Japanese pilots who had panicked as American radar lit the sky above Pearl Harbor had witnessed the birth of a new age, an electronic epoch where information moved at the speed of light, where mechanical eyes could see beyond the horizon, where the marriage of science and democracy had created tools of unprecedented power and precision. Their radios had fallen silent not merely from technical interference, but from the recognition that they faced an enemy whose true strength lay not in anger or vengeance, but in the inexorable advance of human knowledge harnessed to the cause of freedom. In the end, the glowing vacuum tubes of American radar installations stood as more than mere military equipment. They represented the visible manifestation of democratic values, the proof that free societies could outthink, outbuild, and ultimately outlast any totalitarian rival. Their steady light illuminated not just the Pacific skies, but the path to a future where technology would serve humanity's highest aspirations, where the electronic eyes that had once watched For war would stand guard over the peaceful achievements of human civilization. Radar pulse that had first detected Japanese aircraft over Oahu had become the heartbeat of a new world, electronic, interconnected, and forever changed by the recognition that in the marriage of science and democracy lay the ultimate guarantee of human freedom and technological progress.